Welcome to this week's Underclassmen update, where we talk about three players that are not eligible in the 2026 draft and try to give them some love. I'll tell you guys right now, I'll be straight up, we're going to stop doing this as soon as the national championship happens, just so we can start focusing on the guys in the 2026 class. But in the meantime, I do want to talk about some of these underclassmen and kind of give them some more light before you start seeing the national media kind of run away with these names. You know, I know how sports media is. You know, if they're connected to the NFL, they're going to get more love by ESPN. That's not right. I think three of the football players that we're going to be talking about right now are three of the best players regardless of age. I think Colin Simmons and Leonard Moore, if they were eligible in 2026, would both be first rounders. Jadan Baugh, great running back. You know, he's a running back, so it's kind of a different conversation. But we got three prestige premier names that, you know, King Cole's talking about them right now. Eventually, you're going to start hearing Mel Kiper, whoever your favorite draft analysts talk about them in a little bit. And then really down the line, you'll hear about the NFL insiders talking about these guys. But we're talking about them right now. And we're going to get started with Colin Simmons. We also have a story about Colin Simmons this week. I post all the clips that are playing right now onto the WeDraft website, the X account, that is, the Twitter account. So if you want a place to watch them without my narration, please check that out. I don't care if you guys listen to my voice or not. I prefer you guys to, you know, not only listen to me, but reach out and we can talk about these guys. But at the same time, I understand if you just want to watch the videos and form your own opinion. These are all up on the WeDraft site X account. So I post Colin Simmons on Sunday. Colin Simmons reaches out. He actually liked the tweet and then he commented, "Yo, send me this." And I hit him up and I sent him the two videos that I had of him. He's like, "Can you make me a whole season cut up?" I was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll do it." What kind of plays do you want on this? I asked him a question and he just goes, "Bet." So I don't know if there's kind of a communication disconnect between me and Colin Simmons right now. But we'll get that resolved. But we will talk about Colin Simmons today. Yo, great football player. First overall caliber player. Write this down, you know, if you're taking notes. I do think this is a guy that's going to be in the conversation to go first overall. And really, we watched Dylan Stewart on this channel last week. And I really like the way that this season went down, that we could see Dylan Stewart against Texas A&M 2 weeks ago, and then Colin Simmons against Texas A&M last week against a draft-eligible right tackle, by the way, Demetrius Cronover, a guy that's probably going to be a day 2 pick in 2026. So that was really interesting to kind of to see the differences between the two football players, and we're going to talk about this a lot this offseason, where we'll kind of compare them both because it's an interesting conversation. Dylan Stewart, the edge rusher from South Carolina, we talked about him on this channel 2 weeks ago, so they weren't back-to-back, actually. I think there was a week in between. Anyhow, Colin Simmons this week was just getting after the quarterback time and time again. 1.5 sacks. He was in the backfield the entire game. Got a little commotion going on outside. 1.5 sacks. He was in the backfield the entire game, man. The first step to flexibility. This dude just plays with his head on fire. You know, that's what it all starts with Colin Simmons, is the motor that he has. There's plays where he's not in the play at all, and somehow he gets a sack just because of how high end that motor is. It just does not stop running. And talking about the athlete that he is, not just the first step, not just the ability to turn the corner that we talk about all the time. I know how I am. You know, I say the same stuff over and over again. There's some similarities between football players, but you know, being a pass rusher, I know we talk about it all the time, and it sounds like a complicated thing. It's really not, right? It's the first step, the ability to turn the corner, and then your frame, and then your ability to kind of use the moves to actually use that kind of stuff. You know, it's an oversimplification, but you know, the point I'm trying to make is with Colin Simmons, it's not just that. It's also his change of direction ability. There's a play against A&M this week where Marcel Reed's in the pocket, just kind of moving around, making some moves in the backfield. And Colin Simmons almost looks like he's on skates. Just the fluidity of the way that he can change. It doesn't look like, it really did not look like he had cleats on, you know, with spikes on. It really looked like he was ice skating, the way he could just mimic what Marcel Reed was doing in the backfield. It was really, you know, it was just crazy. It really blew me away. If you're watching this with the video output, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. But the entire game, just getting into the backfield, finding Marcel Reed or finding the running back. He's a really strong football player as well. He's not done developing. You know, I think we're going to look at Colin Simmons after this offseason, after another year in the weight room, and we're going to like him even more. But right now, this dude is, in my opinion, one of the best pass rushers in the entire country. I think he's a guy that would be in the top 15 conversation if he was coming out in 2026. he's not coming out in 2026. He's a guy that's not eligible until 2027. And, he's another guy like Ruben Bain. I'm not trying to get ahead of myself, but I feel good about talking about these guys as NFL players because they are sophomores. I try not to do this with true freshmen, but I think Colin Simmons is at that level where we can start kind of talking about him like that. Yeah, and it's all the motor to me. Here's where we're going to get a bit more negative than I'd like to. And this isn't about Colin Simmons. It's about Dylan Stewart. And I think I'll tell you right now, I have a good friend, Clay Fink. He's not really a friend, but we talk to each other on X. He's a good guy. He does a lot of Florida State content. Please check him out if you're interested. But I talked to him about Dylan Stewart, and I talked to him about Colin Simmons, and he said something, that I totally think is true when you actually watch the film. Colin Simmons plays with like one of the best motors in the country. Dylan Stewart plays like he needs his oil changed. And, it's really true because Dylan Stewart has all the talent in the world. The dude is such a freak. He's got a better first step than Colin Simmons, in my opinion. He turns the corner better than Colin Simmons. I think he's a bit longer than Colin Simmons off the top of my head. Well, that's only part of it. That's the physical aspect. That's what exists in the tangible world. But, the mental aspects... And I'm not saying that Dylan Stewart's not a good person or anything like that. I just want to make sure I'm very clear in this. He just has he takes a lot of plays off, and it was really bad against A&M because he had such a good first half, and he just completely went missing in that second half. And the way that game went, if you watched it live, the way that A&M had that big deficit in the first half, and then South Carolina just completely gave up like a 30-plus point. You make one play in the second half, and South Carolina might win that game. And it was just, the second half was just really bad. And I didn't show it on the film because we do try to stay positive on this. But you just don't get that with Colin Simmons. And it was the same team against the same, Cronover, the right tackle, really big guy. Just Stewart just completely went missing in the second half. And he's a great football player. He's still a young guy. I'm sure that he'll get better at that kind of stuff going forward. And he's still going to be in the first overall conversation, by the way, even if he doesn't work that stuff out. That's Dylan Stewart. But like right now, it's just what Colin Simmons gives you as a with his hair on fire. Not even his hair on fire, like the building's on fire. There's just like so much violence in the football game that he plays every snap. So I think right now, if it's a 2-horse race, I think for the top edge rusher in 2027, and I think Colin Simmons is just pulling ahead just a little bit with this season that he had. Crazy sack production. I don't have the exact numbers off the top. I'll have it on the graphic, but really burst onto the scene coming out of Duncanville last season as a 5-star recruit, and he played like a 6-star as a true freshman, and he's only getting better. I'm really excited about Colin Simmons, and yeah, I think Texas fans are too. That tweet actually went pretty viral, and Colin Simmons ended up deleting his reply because I guess it is kind of funny if you're asking some X account for your own highlights. It's kind of weird, but yeah, found a lot of, and another thing, I'm trying to stay on topic here. A lot of Texas fans thought he got held the entire game against A&M, and I didn't think it was anything too egregious. He still got after the quarterback at a high clip. You kind of have to hold. I can't even really blame the offensive tackles for holding a guy like Colin Simmons because that's a better outcome, a 10-yard loss or a hold that doesn't get called. That's a better outcome than Simmons lighting up Marcel Reed, and obviously Marcel Reed's a pretty skinny guy. Lighting him up and maybe his career or season, God forbid his season ending. So I can't really get too mad at the offensive tackles for holding Colin Simmons. I think there's a lot more people mad at the SEC because I don't know, every team thinks the refs are biased towards them or away from them, but that's neither here nor there. Colin Simmons is a great football player. If I was a Texas fan, I'd be all fired up. Really excited to see how he keeps developing because he's not done. I'm telling you, that's what I love talking about these 2026 guys or these 2027 guys is because there's still growth to happen before the NFL. All right, Leonard Moore, defensive back, Notre Dame, great game against Stanford. I don't think we're ever going to see another college football game from Leonard Moore than what he did against Stanford. He had something like 4 pass breakups and an interception. You're not going to see that again. I'm telling you right now, they're not going to throw to Leonard Moore as much as they did. Stanford, Andrew Luck, I know he's the GM at Stanford. I mean, at some point, you got to buzz down. Why are you throwing to one of the best defensive backs in the entire country? So why is Leonard Moore such a good cornerback? 6'2". He's 6'2", and he's a really physical and a really fluid athlete. The hips, I really, if we can get around a edge rusher that's a bit stiff, we can get around a lot of other positions if they're a bit stiff. You cannot be stiff as a cornerback. That hip fluidity has to be good. Leonard Moore at 6'2", about as fluid as an athlete as you're ever going to find. So there's one play where the wide receiver runs a triple move. It was like a sluggo into and out. And Leonard Moore the entire time, this is the interception that he had. Leonard Moore the entire time, the hips were just matching exactly what the wide receiver was doing. I'm not so sure I've ever seen a guy that's 6'2" do that kind of thing. So the hip fluidity is great. The change of direction ability is great. The way that he crashes downhill as well is really good. And I really like seeing that out of a corner that is going to play a lot of zone. I think he can play press man. He's a great press man corner. There's a bit more technique refinement that has to go on, in my opinion, that I'll talk about in a little bit. But I think that quick trigger crashing downhill is so important for cornerbacks that are going to be playing a lot of zone. So that explosiveness, we usually call it explosiveness on edge rushers, but it's all that quick, those quick twitch muscles. Leonard Moore, you're playing a lot of zone, a lot of cover three. You need to crash downhill on flat routes, and we didn't really see Leonard Moore in too much zone this week. It was a lot of man coverage, but we did see a clip where the wide receiver is about 10 yards. Leonard Moore's 10 yards away from the wide receiver. That wide receiver just runs like a 3-yard in. At this point, Leonard Moore already had 5 pass breakups. So if you're Stanford, you're not. We're done. The throwing at Leonard Moore experience is done. We're done. We're done trying that experiment. We're gonna try to just throw a nice little 3-yard man beater. Leonard Moore's 10 yards off. There's no way he makes the play, right? Of course he did. He crashed down from 10 yards and completely knocked it incomplete. And at that point, I'm just like, I just would have quit if I was Stanford. Would have put my hands up and just ran the ball from there on out. But the point I'm trying to make, so explosive downhill. The change of direction is great. Really good man coverage cornerback. That's where that hip fluidity shows up. Really physical also. Really like the way that he punches. He gets down and dirty in the run game as well. We saw that against Stanford this week. However, you watch Mansour Delane. I watch Mansour Delane, the LSU cornerback, plays a lot of man coverage. You just watch the way that Delane kind of punches. He lets the receiver make the decision, and then he's going to punch. I think with Leonard Moore, it looks a bit awkward on those punches when he's in press man. So when you see him in press man, you'll kind of see him. It just doesn't look right. And, I never knew what looked right. If this was 5 years ago and I was just a college football fan and, just enjoying the game, it would have looked fine to me. But then you start watching a lot of the best press man corners across the country, a lot of the best man corners across the country, and a guy like Mansour Delane, I know that's a high standard, but if we're going to be talking about Leonard Moore being a top 5 pick, I'm going to hold him to that high standard. I think if you just watch a bit of Mansour Delane, the way that he times the punches, I'll put him side by side at some point. You just can kind of see some awkwardness with Leonard Moore, and I think if a receiver sees that on tape, they'll kind of have a better ability to avoid those punches and get open because he does lurch a little bit. With Mansour Delane, he's just so patient that it all happens at the right time. Now, that's one of the best cover corners in the entire country, but I think Leonard Moore has that athletic ability to elevate himself into that conversation. I think he's already in that conversation. But that's really it with Leonard Moore. This is the thing. This is why I get excited about football players. It's all about athleticism. It's all about the physical traits because you can't really grow that kind of stuff. That stuff doesn't grow on trees. Man technique, dude. You just get better you get better at that over the offseason. That's a pretty easy thing to get better at. It's a lot easier than getting faster. It's a lot easier than trying to add the fluidity that Leonard Moore has, which is probably impossible. The explosiveness as well. So the frame 6'2", he's going top 5. I think if he continues to play the way that he is, I think even with the concerns about that, quote unquote concerns about the man coverage stuff, at the end of the day, you got time to add that into your arsenal. I think that's just the only room for improvement I can say I really think with Leonard Moore. I'm curious to hear other people's opinions on him, but this is a guy that kind of burst onto the scene as a true freshman in that college football playoff game. He was a household name before this season. I think so was Colin Simmons. But if we're going to talk about him being a serious NFL draft prospect, which he already is, I think that's the one area for improvement that I would be able to come up with. But besides that, that's pretty much it for Leonard Moore, in my opinion. We'll talk about Jadan Baugh in just a second here. I'm curious to hear people's opinions on the playoffs also, by the way. Notre Dame potentially being a snub, Miami potentially being a snub. It seems like it's going to be one or the other. Ole Miss maybe gets snubbed. I don't think so. I think that's so unfair to the football players. Just because their head coach leaves, now you're going to tell the players that, it was only because of Lane Kiffin you were in the playoffs. And then people are kind of like highlighting the Florida State snub from a couple of years ago, that's precedent because they didn't have Jordan Travis. If the precedent's wrong, don't handcuff yourself. I think you can go back on that if it's a wrong. Two wrongs don't make a right. That's pretty basic level stuff, I think. Yeah, so two great defensive prospects we just talked about. I hope you guys realize, I hope I appreciate how good of football players they are. Colin Simmons, Leonard Moore. It's pretty easy to get jacked up about them. Jadan Baugh, great running back as well. This running back class in 2027, Ahmad Hardy, Antoine Raymond, Kewan Lacey. There's going to be more names. Jadan Baugh is another one of those names that deserves to be in that conversation. It's so loaded, and Jadan Baugh is a really exciting football player. So what does Jadan Baugh do well? Massive football player. I think he carries about 230 pounds on him. He had a great game against Florida State. He was the offense in the second half, especially in the second half for Florida, especially in the fourth quarter. I think DJ Lagway attempted something like 2 passes the entire fourth quarter, and Jadan Baugh finished with 38 carries, 266 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns. Really had 3. One of them got called back, and then about 2 plays later he ended up scoring. So that's what Jadan Baugh did this weekend. He's such a powerful football player. To me, it's all about the contact balance, but he's a really good athlete as well. The way that he handled volume against Florida State this week, I think with Kewan Lacey, this is not a real evaluation. This is us just kind of having a bit more fun. But with Kewan Lacey, he's a bit more of a volume puncher. I think with Kewan Lacey, his running style, the way in the game that it looks when you're watching Ole Miss live or watching the Ole Miss highlights after, Kewan Lacey's like, 3 yards, 3 yards, 4 yards, 6 yards, 8 yards, 80 yards. He just kind of builds up, and he doesn't get tired throughout the course of a football game. He's more of a marathon runner, I think, Kewan Lacey is. Jadan Baugh this week, it was just a sprint from the beginning. He started off the game with like a 20-yard run against Florida State, and they just could not handle him. They could not handle how strong of a football player he was. He was just bouncing off of arm tackles, and it's going to get lost how good of an athlete Jadan Baugh is, because he is a really good athlete. I think the way that he can just kind of, how agile he is in the open field. I think a lot of the other guys, we kind of like, at least Kewan Lacey, he's like a one cut that can kind of bounce it to the outside. I think Jadan Baugh can kind of give you a bit more in between the tackles than Kewan Lacey is. I just think Baugh doesn't really have those kind of blinders. Kewan Lacey does a really good job pressing the inside and then just seeing it all the way to the outside and bouncing it for a long run. I think Jadan Baugh just wants to get down and dirty, put his foot in the ground, put his face down, and just keep adding yards after contact. And that's what he did against Florida State. Just time and time again. It was really, if we're talking about boxing, I think I said Kewan Lacey's a volume puncher that turns into a power puncher by the 12th round or by the 10th round or something like that. Jadan Baugh is a power puncher the whole time. No real count. He's just, just giving you right. He doesn't even really throw in any lefts. Kewan Lacey's a bit more like jab, and then a right. Jadan Baugh is just straight rights that are leaned into, really a power puncher. So what does that mean for the NFL draft? Jesus Christ. What does that mean for the NFL draft? I don't know. Interesting conversation. I think Ahmad Hardy's the best running back in 2027 so far, but Baugh, the way that he's handling volume, it's awesome. At the same time, these guys are going to be so worn down. All 3 of them, Kewan Lacey, Jadan Baugh, and Ahmad Hardy as well. They just get carry after carry after carry. I'm almost like going to get more excited about some running back that isn't getting carries right now and has a better junior year, because we can expect them to have a bit more tread on the tires. But, holding that equal, Baugh is just such a powerful football player. It's always difficult to kind of project running backs because it depends on a lot of things, like anything. But I think especially Jadan Baugh, just such a powerful football player. He's a great college football player right now with an NFL upside, no doubt about that. And, I think the broadcaster hit the nail on the head. He was like, if I'm John Summerall, the first call I'm making is to Jadan Baugh, try to keep him on this Florida Gators team in 2026. And I definitely think as far as Florida's concerned, it would be a big guy to keep on this Florida roster. Obviously, them firing Billy Napier might be difficult to do that, but seems like he likes it at Florida anyway. I think that's all we got for today. Jadan Baugh's a great football player. Just kind of ran out of energy. I did here at the end, but you guys let me know what you think about these three guys: Colin Simmons, Leonard Moore, Jadan Baugh. All guys that great college football players already. There's going to be a lot of guys that burst onto the scene next season as juniors and then put themselves into a first round conversation. But if Simmons, if Moore, and Baugh keep playing at the pace that they're playing right now, we're going to be talking about how much volume they have of tape. Because, Leonard Moore and Colin Simmons and Jadan Baugh, really, all three of them, they're going to have 3 years of good tape if they have a good season next year, because all three of them were really good as true freshmen or as freshmen last year, all really good as true sophomores last year. But you guys let me know what you think about them. Thanks for watching.